Good evening and thanks for joining us. From alligators and bears to bobcats, more than 30 different types of wild animals around the Hoosier State will no longer be regulated by the Indiana Department of Natural Resources.
This under a court ruling that stripped its authority over legally owned wild animals. In tonight's top story, News 10's Lindsay Yates has more on why this could put the lives of animals and community members at risk.
This is Sophie, and she's an animal that came from the DNR.
And then there's Cheyenne.
When she came here about 3 years ago, was probably the first time in her life she did not sleep in her own feces.
She, along with 220 other wild cats, now call the lush green landscape at this feline rescue center home.
Hi, Soph. How's my girl?
But founder Joe Taft tells us if it weren't for the Department of Natural Resources,
that animal would still be there, or that animal would be dead.
Taft fears that could be the harsh reality for several wild animals across the Hoosier State. This after a court ruling stripped the DNR of authority over dangerous animals owned as pets.
Oh, this is bad news.
DNR tells us the ruling is part of a lawsuit over whether they could regulate or ban the hunting of captive deer. But the result is more far-reaching.
The concern that we have is primarily towards public safety for the more dangerous animals that a person could now have as a pet.
DNR recently sent this letter to anyone with a wild animal possession permit. It states the agency no longer has authority to impose rules, restrictions, or permits.
We had an officer do an inspection at least once a year to ensure that the enclosure was still compliant with our regulations.
Hi, sweetie.
And without those regulations, animal advocates like Taft worry.
Nobody will know, nobody will care, nobody will have the legal authority to intercede,
Putting the lives of animals and people at risk. In Centerpoint with photojournalist John Tim, Lindsay Yates, News 10.
The Indiana Supreme Court refused to hear the case. DNR tells us they're working with state lawmakers now in hopes of creating legislation that would provide them with more authority in the future. However, the issue will not be heard until the next legislative session in January.